This video is going to be about data types in VBA. Basically, when we're talking about data types, we're talking about storage and memory, and we're talking about things we can work with in our program. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about this so that we can get a better sense of what's happening with these different data types. Now you'll notice in my program that I have on the screen here, I've declared a number of variables here. I have a whole number variable, I have a decimal number, I have a variable called chars, and I have another data type you haven't seen before, and that's Boolean. You'll notice Boolean data type there. And finally, this last one is the kind of the weird stepchild, if you will, of the family. This data type is known as variant. So what I'm going to do with this program, I'm just going to go ahead and run this program and talk about it as you see it. But as I run the program, I've got the locals window open down here in the bottom pane, and we're going to be able to take a look at some of these variables as it's running. Now to run a program and be able to step through it, remember you can go to the debug menu, and instead of putting a break in, I'm just going to start it from the very beginning. And so I'm going to do the step into, and you just hit your F8 key to do this. So if you just hit F8, notice it starts right at the very beginning of your program and it highlights the line that it's about ready to execute. So actually there is no execution of dim statements. Dim statements are simply reserving the memory and putting the name in the program that matches that memory location. And you'll notice here that it initialized our memory. It initialized the whole number variable to 0 and the decimal number to 0. The string gets an empty string, which is just quote quote. The true-false variable also is initialized to false, and the variant is initialized to some kind of odd thing here called empty. Now I'm going to hit F8 to run to the next statement. Well, the next statement that's about ready to execute is just this assignment statement that will assign 2 to the whole number variable. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit F8. And you'll notice in the watch window that indeed it did indeed do the 2 here on the whole number variable. And now the next statement says let's go ahead and take that whole number variable, multiply it times itself, and then with the assignment store it back into its memory location. So we retrieve the 2, multiply it times the retrieving of another copy of 2. 2 times 2 is 4, and then we store it back in. So if I hit F8, that should update to 4. So indeed it did update to 4. We can see that update to 4 right here. The next thing is just going to do an assignment into that double variable, the data type of double. And we got the 3.45. Now the next line then, it says take 3.45 and multiply it times the whole number and stick that into the decimal. I could have actually just put the variable decimal number here, but I just screwed that up a little bit. So if we take 3.45 and multiply it times 4, well, I'm not going to do the math. I'm just going to let the computer do the math. So you'll notice then that's 13.8. So 13.8 is now in this variable. And the next line down here is a little bit strange because what it's going to do is it's going to say take that 13.8 and assign it to that whole number variable. So you might want to just try to predict for a minute what's going to happen when I assign this decimal number to this whole number storage location. Now you know that it won't store the decimal part, but do you think what do you think it might do with that decimal part? We got that 0.8. What's it going to do with that 0.8? Well, let's just hit the F8 key and see what it does with it. Well, you'll notice what it did here is it rounded it up to 14. So that was kind of interesting behavior. It didn't just chop it off. It rounded it up to 14. Now, to tell you the truth, I would have kind of expected that it would have just chopped it off. But languages, all different languages work in different ways. In the Java programming language, it would have just chopped it off if I had said I wanted to do something like that. But here we notice Visual Basic rounded it. So that's something to remember. This next statement, of course, just takes the string ABC, this literal string that you see here in the quotes, and assigns it to that string variable. So let's go ahead and hit F8. And we notice, of course, in memory that now we have the string ABC stored in memory. Now this next one is a little bit interesting. You haven't seen maybe something like this before. We're going to take this variable ABC, the variable chars, and we notice that it has an ABC stored in it. And we're going to concatenate it onto itself again. So we retrieve ABC from memory, concatenate it on with the ampersand operator there, onto ABC again. So when I hit F8, what should I see in the memory location? You can probably guess. Well, it's ABC, ABC. That's kind of not much of a surprise. So you can actually manipulate memory in a very interesting way, and we'll work with a bunch of string functions that take memory, string memory, and chop it up into different parts and extract pieces and things like this. This next one you see is the use of this Boolean variable. A Boolean variable stores a true-false value. So you have to basically have some sort of statement over on the right-hand side that's going to evaluate to some sort of true-false situation. So, for instance, in this example, I'm using the less than operator. So I say, is 10 less than 5? Well, of course, we all know that 10 is not less than 5. So if I execute this statement, the value false is the value of 10 less than 5, because that's false. So it should store false into that variable location. So let's see if it does that. And we really can't tell that it did, of course, because it was already false. But indeed, after executing that statement, the value is still false, so we can feel pretty confident that that's the case. Now, in this case, it says 2 times 3 less than 6. Well, 2 times 3 less than 6. 2 times 3 is 6, so is 6 less than 6? That ought to be false also. So I hit F8, and indeed it still is false. Now this next line is an interesting one, because this variant variable, as you noticed above, when we actually declared the variable, we didn't give it any data type. Notice there's no as after the name of the variable here. We just said dim var. So we have the variable name, but with no data type. Well, if you don't give a data type to a variable, it is a variant. It has been declared. There is a dim statement for it, but it's a variant. And a variant is a very odd data type. And I don't want you to use variant data types, because variant data types are dangerous for beginners if they don't know what they're doing. Once a person understands a variant and how they work, then it is a data type that can be useful in your program. But for beginning in this course, I don't want you to use variants. So let's just go ahead and hit F8, and it'll execute and see what it does. So it put a 15 into that variant variable. We can see it right here. There's the 15. Now you'll notice on this next line down, I say put Bob into that variable. Well, now this seems a little bit nuts, because we just stored a number into that variable. That memory location we now think is a number, but now we're about ready to store a string into that memory location. So before I hit the F8 key, we might want to try to predict what might happen with this line. Well, a couple things might happen. One is the program might crash right here, because it's going to say, wait a minute, you can't store a string into a number memory location. The second thing that might happen is, because of the name variant, it might give you a little bit of a sense that this thing can kind of be like a chameleon and kind of take on the color of what's around it. Well, let's see what happens when I hit F8. And you'll notice that it went ahead and stored Bob into that variable location. So variants can take on different data types as the program runs, and that's one of their cool things about them, but it's also one of the very dangerous things about them. Now this next statement is another one that we're not sure what's going to happen, because now we're saying take that variant and multiply it times 2. Well, if we look and see what's actually stored in that variant right there, we see that there's the word Bob stored in that variant. Now, Bob's a string, and Visual Basic doesn't really like to multiply strings. The language Python would let you do something like this possibly, but Visual Basic doesn't like this. So I'm thinking if I execute that statement, it's going to try to take the word Bob, which is a string of characters, multiply it times 2, which is a number, and have a little bit of a problem with that. So I'm going to hit F8, and immediately we get a very good error message in this case, to tell you the truth. It's telling us that we have a type mismatch. Well, in this case, it actually makes sense, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to take a string and multiply it times a number. And I doubt if any of you would really successfully complete that multiplication, because what are you really going to do? You could, well, it's just kind of crazy. So we have a type mismatch because it's trying to do multiplication with a string, which you can't. So it's saying, I have a mismatch here. I need a number to be able to do this multiplication. So that's the problem. And if you hit the debug button, it'll actually highlight the line of code where the error is, or you can just hit end and your program will be reset. I'm going to hit debug so you can see that. So it highlighted the line of code and told me that's my problem. And I can never actually hover my mouse over my variable there and see that it's Bob. So normally when this kind of thing happens, you want to, you really want to know what line the error was on, and then you got to try to figure it out. But before you can rerun the program, you need to remember to hit the reset button to reset that program. So I could put an ampersand in there and actually say ampersand var and add that string to itself. See ya.